Editor-at-large Yusuf Erim is at the conference. He's been speaking about the war in Ukraine with Kurt Volker, who's a former US ambassador to NATO and was also a US special representative for Ukraine negotiations.
First off, we have to differentiate between a ceasefire and a solution. A ceasefire in place right now would reward Russian aggression. They've taken 20% of Ukrainian territory. A ceasefire would allow them to keep it. So that's one issue. Maybe there's a reason for a ceasefire, humanitarian purposes, save lives of soldiers and so forth, but that's not a solution. When you come to the idea of a solution, you need both sides to want it. And so when you think about negotiations, just take a step back for a second. You need to not only know what you want, that's rule number one, but you need to know what the other side wants. And then you need to shape the situation on the ground to create the possibilities for a solution where you can each get something of what you want. And the final rule here is that nothing is ever over. You have to be persistent in this all the time. And even after the negotiation, you still have to shape the facts on the ground. So when I was doing this, 2017 to 2019, again, the Russians were not serious. They kept denying that they were involved in Ukraine, denying that they occupied eastern Ukraine, insisting that the Ukrainians were the ones to blame for not implementing any of the Minsk agreements. And so what we had to do was try to turn the table on Russia a little bit by exposing exactly what it was that they were doing, by calling out what they were doing as an occupation, changing some of our own domestic perspectives about this, lifting the arms embargo on Ukraine so that they could begin to build some defensive capabilities so that it would be more of a deterrent to Russia in the future, so maybe Russia would conclude this is all they're going to get. And frankly, that failed. This effort failed. I would say largely because of the effort to impeach President Trump. This essentially destroyed the Western position in supporting Ukraine at that time. Now we're in a situation where Russia is actively involved in using military force to seize as much Ukrainian territory as they can and to deny Ukraine's existence as a nation and a people and a European state. They're not going to succeed at that, but they don't think that they have yet exhausted their possibilities for gains. So what we need to do from the Western side is support Ukraine to the degree where it is obvious to Putin, obvious to Russia, this is their high water mark. They're not going to get any more. And in fact, the more time goes by, the harder it's going to get for Russia. Until we get to that point, they are not going to negotiate seriously.
How do we get both sides back to the table for sincere talks? Sincere talks meaning realistic, solution-oriented type of diplomacy. Who would be the actors? What would be the venue? What would be the conditions that both sides get back to the table?
Well, you have to change the conditions on the ground so that Russia no longer believes that it has more to gain from fighting. Because right now they believe they continue to attack. They just took Avdiivka yesterday. They believe they continue to make gains and they can outlast Ukraine and they can outlast the West. So we need to change that calculus on the Russian side. And remember that Russia is the one that has demands on Ukraine. Ukraine has no demands on Russia. Ukraine only wants its territory back. They're not trying to take Russian territory. They're not trying to do regime change in Russia. It's Russia that's trying to do that in Ukraine. So we need to change the calculus on the Russian side to think that they're not going to get any further here. That can create a basis for talking. But at this stage, the Russians are nowhere near there.